Evening. Welcome back to a new video. No, I know, I know. And today's video is going to be a very interesting subject. This is the new video on Mega Geniuses, and this is a new film Korea or retrospective. But this time we're not doing a director, we're doing an author set in the country of Scotland. Now I live in Scotland, I live in Kilmarnock, a small town, but he lives in Edinburgh. So let's talk about Irvine Welsh. Irvine Welsh is a Scottish author who lives in Edinburgh. He has wrote many books basically focusing on stuff like drugs and characters. His work has been highly praised and basically has led to many film adaptations and basically adaptations of his work into theatre, and hell, he's even getting a TV show based on one of his books. But this is basically the story on how his film adaptations and his books went to be. His first book, Trainspotting, was a really well received book. And it was all about basically what his life was in the 90s in Edinburgh due to basically the pop and rock era of his heroin addiction. Then the book was adapted into a film. The film was directed by a director known as Danny Boyle. This was after the success of his first film, Shallow Grave. Shallow Grave was well received by critics and basically is now known as a cult classic. The studio that distributed the film, Film 4, which is also very known for basically making other films like Sexy Beast, which was directed by Jonathan Glazer, and there was also Gangster Number 1, which was directed by Paul McGuigan, we'll get into him later, and This Is England by Shane Meadows. The film follows Mark Renton, a heroin addict who's trying to get off his heroin addiction but keeps getting pulled back into it by his friends, and basically he keeps trying, but his friends keep coming back down to it. The small budget, the film was actually a humongous hit, and basically was like changed British cinema forever. Also, the film was well received by critics and was praised, even winning awards at the Cannes Film Festival, which was when the film was picked up by Miramax and was released around the world. You know Miramax, and basically they just decided to make one change. Make it a lot more thicker so people can understand the language. After the success of the film, Film 4 offered basically a director known as Paul McGuigan, who you may remember from Gangster Number 1, to direct another adaptation of his books. The next book that he adapted was based on the 23 short story book, The Acid House. Out of the 23 stories that were adapted from the book, the 3 stories that are added in the film are basically really different. First one focuses on someone having a really bad day, and basically how it gets worse is that basically God, yes, God, gets sick of his crap and basically turns him into a fly. Yes, a fly. Second story basically follows a couple that just got married, but after the neighbour has arrived, basically she starts dating him and starts ruining the husband's life. Third story focuses on Coral Bryce. He's just about to get married to his girlfriend, but after taking a little bit of an acid trip, he accidentally is shocked by a lightning bolt. The lightning bolt also hits an ambulance and basically transfers his bodies with a baby. Unlike Trainspotting, this one was not well received by critics, and basically took a while to get another Irvine Welsh adaptation out for a long time. But then in 2011, we had another adaptation of his work, Irvine Welsh's Ecstasy, based on the anthology book of the exact same name, based on the story Undefeated, an Acid House romance, and then was released as just one film instead of an anthology film. The film follows Woodsy. He's basically a nightclubber who basically likes to do ecstasy. He also owes a mafia boss named Solo money, but basically he gets distracted when he falls in love with a woman as he starts to fall in love. But basically a trouble arises as the relationship may be drug or life. This one was directed by a guy named Rob Hilden, I think that's how you spell his name. But anyways, the film was not well received by critics, but I actually kind of enjoyed the film. Then, in 2013, we had Filth, based on the book in 1998 known as Filth, starring James McAvoy. The film was about Sergeant Bruce Robertson is an awful cop who's trying to solve a case of an Asian kid who was murdered, but also trying to get a promotion. He's trying to eliminate his friends from the promotion gig, but there's one tiny problem. He's starting to lose control of his mind and basically may lose it forever. Harvey Weinstein was trying to make the film back when the book was released, even setting up his own British division at Miramax. But the thing was that he couldn't get the film out, and basically it was known as unfilmable. Until 2013, when John S. Bird came on the project and basically wrote the screenplay that basically matched what the book's tone was. He's also directed a film called about Stan and Ollie, which I haven't seen yet. The film received mixed reviews but was well received by audiences, and the film made a lot of money at the box office, but now it was time for another adaptation of Welsh's work. This was the time for the sequel to the first adaptation of his work, T2 Trainspotting. Based on Irvine Welsh's book Porno, which was not as well received as the original, and even Danny Boyle admits that. But also the title was changed to T2 Trainspotting due to Filth's release in Germany bombing due to the title. Ha 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 ha. Danny Boyle also couldn't make the film back 10 years later due to basically arguments with Hugh McGregor and their friendship ending because of the production of the film The Beach. Boyle also wanted the film not to take place in 10 years later but instead 20, and basically released the film in 2016, 20 years later. But that didn't really happen. But anyways, this film takes place like 20 years later and follows Mark Renton returning back to Edinburgh. And basically everything is kind of not going his way. Frank Begbie finds out that he's in Edinburgh, tries to kill him after locking him up in prison, and basically he copes and talks with how Edinburgh has changed over these years. The film was definitely brilliant, and is definitely a really good sequel. But, well, let's talk about the critical. The film was well received by critics, but it wasn't as well received as the original, with many critics complaining it was too similar to the original. Well, it obviously does do that because history can repeat itself. That's kind of what the story's about. A lot of Irvine Welsh's books are really, really good and basically have been well received. I would even like to see some of them adapted into films or even TV series. And basically the most interesting thing is about them. Hell, he's even written some more like Trainspotting sequels, like The Blade Artist and Dead Man's Trousers. Welsh is a really, really good writer, and has basically made some brilliant books. He's managed to capture Scotland culture in a different way. It's either be hip or kind of weird. I really, really like Welsh's books, and basically any adaptation of his next work I would be totally excited to see. I have heard that basically BritBox, the new thing, is trying to turn his book Crime, into a series, and I would love for my first indie film to basically be an adaptation of the Marabou Stock Nightmares. And that would be fun to do. But oh man, I'd really like to meet him, and I recommend you check him out. I would like to do a version of his books, but this is just his films for now.